Welcome to Visual Regression Testing with BackstopJS. My name is David Needham. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon. A lot of my job involves creating training curriculum, going to camps like this, and leading training workshops online. I like to say I sort of sit between the developers that are actively using Pantheon and the developers that are out in the community. I'm sorry, the developers that are actively building Pantheon and the developers that are out in the community actually using it. So as a result, I end up seeing a lot of technologies. I end up having opportunities to experiment with different new ways of doing things, and that's how I came to learn about BackstopJS, and that's a little bit about why I'm excited to share it with you today. So this is a workshop that I've given, both as a 3-hour half-day workshop, a full-day workshop, and a 30-minute session, a 90-minute session, and now an hour-long session. So all of my slides are available at visual-regression.davidneedham.me. You can grab these, and I didn't remove anything from the slides. So as a result, there's some wordy slides, there's some examples that I would typically wait and let the class go through on their own. I'm going to just do those, and you can watch me because we only have an hour. And we'll see how the timing actually ends up, but the hope here is that you'll be able to go through this in your own time whenever you want, and you'll be able to try all of the experiments that we're going to be doing today. So there's some setup instructions. I already have these set up, so again, I'm going to keep on moving through. So first, let's learn a little bit about visual regression testing in general. So first, my first question when I came into this topic was, what is visual regression exactly? Well, if you take the word regression, if you define it, well, you're talking about a return to a former or less developed state. You're regressing, you're going backwards in some sort of progress. There are lots of situations where I personally have been plagued by visual regression. For example, if I'm doing routine security updates with my Drupal or WordPress website, then you will sometimes have situations where you do these updates and something breaks on your site. Now, when you're just doing security updates, you don't expect anything to change except that whatever piece it was that was getting fixed is getting fixed. But sometimes, if it's been a while, an update might break functionality or break things that you see, and so that's one situation where you might have visual regression. Another situation is with theming and site building, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So if we take a look at this first example, I'm using a WordPress site here because that's just what my screenshots are, but it's exactly the same with any Drupal site that you've updated. Let's just say for this use case that we have updates available, so we click that button to apply the update. We're doing this in two different environments. We have a live environment, which is demonstrated here, and we have a development environment. And we're actually checking. We're making sure, just with visual QA, with ourselves kind of looking, maybe scrolling around the site to see if we can tell what changed between live and dev. Live being the site that hasn't been updated, and dev being the site that you have updated already. And especially if you're not expecting any visual change, it can be really difficult for humans to see the change on the screen. So between these two, even if we set up a script or something that would actually scroll between them, it can still be a little difficult to tell exactly what might have changed after performing this update. Well, you also want to check on mobile and whatever other breakpoints you have that you want to check on. The point here is that we have to check quite a bit to make sure that things aren't changing unexpectedly, and it ends up being a lot of time, and we're just not very good at doing it ourselves. So enter visual regression testing. So in this situation, we're using machine vision. We're using a computer to analyze, to look at screenshots of two different versions of the same website and compare them. And it can actually highlight the differences between the two. So it's able to detect when things have changed between these two versions, and then quickly highlight, show you what that change is. In this case, we're going to be using BackstopJS, and it does end up being pretty quick for us to actually run through it. I should say the point of the presentation today is not to help you to be experts in BackstopJS. It's more to help you feel comfortable installing it, running it on a site or two, and just seeing how easy it is to actually get up and running, so that if you want to use it for little side projects or even big projects, you can have a little bit of experience with that. All right, so if we take a look at the difference, if we're comparing for this specific example that we were looking at on the front page, we actually get a little scrubber here with BackstopJS that generates this report for us automatically. And we can see pretty quickly the search box actually changed, the little button. It went from being just a little magnifying glass to including that search text. And it's much, much easier to see that something changed when we have that highlight happening. To demonstrate a real-world example, something that happened to me literally about an hour ago, I came into the room. I noticed from a previous presentation that the contrast ratio on these projectors are not the greatest. Specifically, my black background slides weren't showing up very well when I plugged it in to make sure. And so I'm like, well, I'd like to try maybe a light background and something higher contrast, but how can I be sure that I didn't forget to change something? Like, if only there was a tool that could visually compare two different. So you might see where this is going. So I went in, ran a quick visual regression test, and yeah. So here's let me click on reference, and I can see. So this is just the reference. If I do diff. So this is highlighting the things that have changed between the two, between test and here. And I can actually see really quickly, well, this is mobile. Let me show you on desktop because it's a little bit easier to see. So here on the test version, we can see I can go slide by slide and make sure that the things that I'm changing are still visible, and that I'm not forgetting to change one of those text areas from black background to white background or something else. And so I was able to flip through and actually see and verify, like, oh, look at that, those little code snippets, those are not viewable in this version. So I need to go in and change that, and oh, it looks much better after I get it updated. So, real-world example, it worked extremely well. That's a part of what I'm trying to demonstrate here with this presentation is that visual regression testing does not have to be strictly an automated test that runs on every commit or on every deployment or on whatever. You can use it for anything where you want to compare the changes between two things that are on a website. So some benefits here. You end up creating two versions, the reference and the test, and you compare them. In this case, the reference is like your production site, and we'll be looking at that later, where we define this is a site that we don't expect to change. And then we have the test, which is going to be your environment, which might be your local setup or your development environment, or your staging environment, or whatever you call it. The test environment will be changing pretty regularly as you're going through and doing CSS changes or updates or whatever, whereas the reference may more or less stay the same until you actually deploy those changes up to your live site. Using BackstopJS, we are also able to support multiple viewports, so you're not strictly looking at the desktop version. You can enter as many viewports as you want to test any sort of resolutions that make sense. There are also scripts in place to scan your entire site, so there are spiders that you can get that will actually go through and grab the URLs for every page of your website and then generate a report so that you can run the test against every page. As you can imagine, if you have a big website, that ends up taking quite a long time to run, so usually that's not the best way to go, but in some situation, you might appreciate that. If there are errors or anything like that, it's usually pretty good at demonstrating or telling you what that error is with some help, and we'll probably see that at some point when we are running the examples. And then these tests that we're running are extremely easy to write, and we'll see that in just a moment as well. There are some limits, though. As we go through and start playing with visual regression testing, you'll discover that there are lots and lots and lots of errors or noise or sort of things that don't actually appear to be different that it says are different, or dynamic content on your website that is intentionally supposed to be changing that can totally cause your test to fail. If you have a block that is constantly showing a random piece of news, or if people are constantly adding new content to the site, that can cause your test to fail because it's comparing the live site with all this new information with your development site that hasn't been updated for a while. As well, with the example we'll look at in a minute, you'll probably see that we have a slideshow. Slideshows and YouTube videos and other things that are sort of being loaded on the fly can sometimes have issues where it'll say there's differences, but the differences are inconsequential. And we'll take a look at how to work those out too. Ultimately, in the end, though, visual regression testing is still a huge time-saving tool. So hopefully we'll see that we can quickly identify the changes between our two sites. All right, so let's start using BackstopJS. BackstopJS specifically, you can define what render engine you want it to use if you have particular preferences for one versus the other. There's Chromium, Puppeteer, and there's several others you can choose from. There are also options to simulate user interactions. So if you want to simulate people clicking on things on the screen, if you want to go through a process and then end up, maybe you want them to fill out a quiz and make sure that the you've completed this quiz page also looks right. You can set up a script to do that. You have options of doing either the visual, the report that pops up and you can compare and get that little scrubber, or just a command line report. Maybe you're doing it as part of an automated process. And then you do also have the option of installing globally on your computer, so you can run BackstopJS anywhere you want for any project, or installing it specific to a site so that each site has its own installation of BackstopJS with its own preferences. Maybe you share that with your team on the per project basis so that it all shows up consistently for every single person. So everything, this is one place where I did not clearly change the color, but I changed this just right before. So that is not visible at all. So let me switch. We're going to be taking a look at our backstop.json file in just a moment. Everything is defined in there, and I'll break it down when we get to that section. So here's how we're going to get started. I have a project that I have already preloaded. I have a live site right here, pantheondemo.com, for our Pantheon Theater website that we use for a lot of demonstrations. We also have this local version of the site, Pantheon Weekly Demo site.lando.site, which I have set up locally using Lando. From all indications, if we look, besides the slideshow changing out of sync, these two sites should be visually identical. And so we can get started. We're going to use that site for this demonstration today. So we just start by initializing Backstop. So we open up our command line tool and do backstop init. And what this is going to do is actually place a backstop.json file in this project. It's going to create the folders where the screenshots will eventually go, and generally just get everything ready to use Backstop on this project. Now, after this has been set up, if we open up that backstop.json file, we can take a look at what some of those configuration settings are. So at the very top here, we start with viewports. With the viewports, we're able to define all the various resolutions for things we want to test, and we're able to give each one of those a label. So right now we have two. We have the phone and the tablet. Maybe you also want a desktop, or maybe you don't care about one of those. You could remove them. It's very easy just to copy and paste or change the values in whichever way you want. We have a section here for on-ready script and on-before script. These are the pieces that will kind of get your environment set up and click buttons if you need to before or after it's ready. In this case, it's part of the example when we first do backstop init. We don't really need those for our example here, so I'm going to go ahead and remove those just by deleting them. Next, we have a section for scenarios. So this is where we can set up each URL that we want to test. So we start by defining a label, what this is going to be called. So for our example, we have the Pantheon demo like that. There's a section or configuration here for cookie path. So if you wanted to actually log someone in to log backstop.js into the website, you can do that by passing the cookie to get them in, kind of share the session, and then they'll be able to test the administrative interface as well. For our example, it isn't really relevant, so I'm going to remove that line. Now we have the line here for the URL. The URL is the production version of our website. So I'm going to jump over to my site, grab the URL for pantheondemo.com, put that in here. Next, we have the reference URL. This is our development environment. So I'm going to be, actually, let me jump back to my slides real quick. Yes, I did get that mixed up. So URL is the development URL. Reference URL is the production. So let me just swap that. So the URL that I want is going to be my local Lando site. So let's grab the URL for that, put it in. And then there's all sorts of other configuration here related to this particular scenario. If we want to add additional tests, additional pages to run through, we can do that just by adding an additional scenario after this. To keep things simple, though, let's actually just keep everything else how it is. I'm going to click Save to save this work. And then we're just going to go back to our site. We're going to create a reference. So back here from my command line, I'm going to do backstop reference. At this point, it's going out to our live website, and it's taking a screenshot of the front page for each viewport that we defined. It says it completed, so that's good. Next, all I have to do is backstop test. So now it is creating screenshots of the URL, the local environment, and it's actually generating the report to compare the two. Now, remember I said that these should be identical. However, as I also said, there's lots of false negatives. In this case, it is saying there's a difference between the slideshow. For some reason, it could be a single pixel that's off. It could be that it's loading. Maybe one is loading slower than the other one. It's really difficult to say for sure. But there are ways that we can get around this. If we go back to our code, there's a section here for delay, where we can say, don't take a screenshot for this many seconds into the future. This is in milliseconds, so I'm actually going to say 300 to say 3 seconds. And I'm also going to go ahead and preemptively put in a remove selector. So this is going to remove the markup, the text, the HTML from our screen, so that it's not kind of complicating our future tests. So I'm going to put in the class for Flex Slider. That's going to remove our slideshow at the very top from the tests. I'm going to click Save. I'm going to go back to here. Now, because I'm changing what we're actually testing against, I need to regenerate the reference file. So I'm going to run backstop reference to regenerate the references. Now backstop test again to regenerate the test and run the report. Okay, so this passed. There's no differences between the two. And you know what? I actually did that incorrectly. So these two here, I chose to remove it. I meant to choose to hide it. When you say remove, it actually removes the markup completely, which can cause the rest of the page to kind of shift around and look a little funky like that did. What I should have done is actually put this in hide, which will actually visually hide the elements from the page, so that when the screenshot's taken, everything will still be positioned the same way, but we won't see it on the screen if something minor was modified. So I'm going to resave that, rerun backstop reference. Rerun backstop test. And here we go. So it looks the same, and the page looks pretty good still. It still is portioned out the way it's supposed to be. All right, so let me close my old reports and get back here. So everything matches right now, but what if we wanted to make some sort of a change? What if we have been tasked with fixing the color of that section? Maybe someone has said, man, that purple color, it really contrasts in a weird way with the page. We think it would look a little bit better if we changed it to a nice plum color, a nice like lighter purple color. So we're like, okay, cool, let's give that a try. Sure, not a problem. I'm gonna go into my code. I'm gonna go to my themes. I'm gonna go into my CSS for this theme. I'm gonna go down to where we defined the purple. I'm just gonna put in plum instead. And now, because we're not changing the live version of the website, we don't have to regenerate our references. We can just run the test. So if I do backstop test, we change the color of that CSS file. And there we go. So we can see, yes, there is definitely a difference here. It did change it to a lighter color. And if we look at the difference, it's highlighting it in this sort of bright pink color. It actually looks a little funky on the screen with the contrast ratios. But so that's we can show this to them and be like, yeah, it changed, and I can confirm this didn't change CSS or change the color of anything else on the page. It only did this particular button, so it kind of managed our scope. But what if they're like, oh, well, yeah, that looks terrible. What if we wanted to match our color, the color of our logo a little bit better? So I'm like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. So let's go back here, and let's say, well, background color, let's make it a nice Pantheon yellow. And maybe to make the text look a little bit better, we need to make that black. Let's go ahead and go with this and give another try. So let me go back to, this is my local site, refresh. Yes, I think that looks much better, kind of fits with the overall theme a lot better, but it still pops. So let's test to make sure it didn't accidentally change CSS anywhere else in the page. And here my report is showing, again with the highlight, that yes, it is only changing that particular section right there. And again, I can get the nice scrubber to see what it looks like before and after. So that's a quick example of just comparing with this right here. You can imagine a situation where you might accidentally be breaking other parts of your website with a simple CSS change. Maybe you've even had that happen to yourself before, where, oh yeah, this is a quick change, I'm just going to change the color of this thing, and then all of a sudden some other page that you weren't expecting is now different. By accounting for that with BackstopJS, you're able to visually catch all of those inconsistencies. All right, so yes, the whole, it'll just be a quick fix. That would be great if it was just a quick fix, but how often is that the case? Using BackstopJS can help protect you from these snafus, from breaking sites that are not meant to be broken. So there's some things to note here. You know, what happens if we change the viewports or the scenarios? Well, that's pretty easy. So we're currently testing the mobile and tablet, but you know, if we went into our backstop.js file, backstop.json file, and maybe we don't want the tablet version. We want a full-blown desktop version. So we make it something like 1600 by 900, not a problem. And then maybe in addition to our front page, we also want to check our login page just to verify that that page continues to work properly too. Well, I can do that if I go into the scenario section. Let's go and just put a comma, paste, Pantheon demo, login page. I'm going to change the URLs now to /user. Now if I go back to my command line and I'm going to do a backstop reference, we're changing what's being tested against, so we need to create new reference images. Taking a little bit longer now because we do have to do 2 sets of screenshots instead of just, or I guess 2 sets of 2 screenshots instead of just a total of 2. Now we'll do test. Generated our report. And now we can see, oh, there's still some weird inconsistency with the slideshow. As you can see, the little arrows have been targeted for some reason. But if you look, we do have a larger viewport now. We have it's a little bit wider here. But we're also testing against the login page, which apparently looks a little funkier than I expected. There is a login box here at the bottom. So we're able to expand the viewports and the scenarios any way we want. The whole point here is we're really just running those 3 commands: backstop init to get the project running, backstop reference to generate the reference files, and then backstop test to actually run the test. One thing that's worth checking is just making sure, if you're going through this on your own, making sure that you're actually changing the version. So making sure your local version is affecting some sort of change. So now if we look at expanding this a little bit further, maybe automating the process a little bit with some continuous integration, it's good to be thinking about what parts of your job you could let a robot do for you. What part of your job is really tedious and monotonous? What part is really boring? What thing could you let a robot do so you don't even have to think about it anymore? Well, I've already said that BackstopJS itself is much better at spotting differences than most humans are with their eyes. Well, what if we did that automatically every time that we had a pull request in GitHub? That'd be pretty cool. And get a whole visual regression test to make sure that for every pull request, we're not changing things unexpectedly. Well, we can definitely do that. There are several options for this. One example that I like to demonstrate is we have a script, the Pantheon example terminus auto update script, that will go through and fully automate the process of doing updates on your site. So you don't want to worry about doing module updates or anything like that anymore. You want to let it just be completely fully automated, hands-off. This script will do that for you. It's integrating with Circle CI. It's on cron, checking for updates. If an update's detected, it will spin up a branch environment called a multi-dev environment. It will apply all of the updates there. It will then do visual regression testing with BackstopJS, BHAT testing, performance testing, I believe. And then I think there might be one other one. And then if everything passes, if there are 0 pixel differences between live and this new branch with the updates, it will actually back up your environments and then deploy that back up to live. So fully hands-off, you don't have to do anything about it. And this script is relying on BackstopJS for that process. The confidence that we have to deploy directly to live without a human looking at it is in this visual regression test passing or failing. Another good example, a little bit more like what I mentioned earlier with GitHub, we ran a class at DrupalCon called Automated Workflows in Drupal 8 with GitHub, Composer, and Circle CI. As part of this workflow, imagine a situation where your team is working with Composer to build a Drupal 8 site, and you are hosting this repository on GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab or wherever it might be. You're building your site with Composer, so you're running all those commands to actually get it going. And you want to test to make sure that every time your site is being built, you're not breaking things. It's a typical visual regression situation. Well, on pull request, Circle CI can generate a visual regression test, put the visual regression test right in the pull request, and then whomever, maybe the lead developer or whoever's actually approving the work that everyone is doing, can look at that, quickly see if it's working the way they'd expect it to, and then either accept or deny or whatever. It's a way of saving their time and helping to make sure that they don't have to go through and really analyze line by line everything that's been changed. And there's a script here that you can grab to set this up on your own site if you want to check this out, see what it's like. You can click the link for that. Yes. All right. So now another demo that we can run here. My colleague who actually inspired me to create this version of the presentation actually set up a Node app to run BackstopJS on demand. He's doing this with the sort of the thinking that maybe you have a team, maybe you're a marketing company or a Drupal shop, and you have a QA team that is specifically responsible for making sure that bugs like this don't get through, that they're visually comparing the sites. Or maybe you don't have a QA team and you just have a project manager that's responsible for making sure that those things don't get through. Well, in that situation, you don't want to make them install BackstopJS. You don't want to make them grab the site and put it locally. Maybe they do that already, but anything you can do to make that easier and faster for them will be a positive. So with Node, he's able to set all of this up to have BackstopJS running inside of this Node object so that you just have to run Node and it will automatically run the test that you want it to run. So again, I'm kind of going through a little bit quickly, but you can grab this, clone it locally, and start playing with it. You can modify it, of course, any way that you want. I already have it running on my computer, so I'm just going to demonstrate what it's doing. So let me jump into that folder. Okay, I'm going to go check out my branch. And now I already have a Node installed. I already have those prerequisites, so I'm just going to do npm run start. So at this point, all I did was install or run that single command. It is pre-configured with scenarios and viewports and BackstopJS setup. All the prerequisites are installed. Run that single command, which of course you could put inside of a script or have it run on a button click on your website or anything you want. That generates the report that pops up so you can quickly see what's changed for that. So like I said, everything is pre-configured, it's ready to go. But if you want to make a change to it, that's also really easy. So if this was not the example we wanted, maybe we want to change this to work with our own site that we've been playing with today. That's easy. All I have to do is hack this BackstopJS .json file, which is inside of includes, and just run it again. Okay, so it comes preloaded with a bunch of viewports. Maybe for our example, we really don't care about all those viewports, and it makes our test run a lot longer. So let's go ahead and just do desktop to make it really simple. And then for our URL and reference URL, we can grab those here. I think I want that one, and then the reference URL. Okay, and save. So it does have a delay here, which is totally fine. Let's go in. All we have to do is run npm run start again. Should be a little bit faster now. All right, and it generates our reports, and it is nice and simple and packaged up. So you could give this script to someone, and it'd be easier to run Backstop without having to worry about all the configuration. Now, there's another example here where maybe you have multiple sites you're working with. Maybe you're responsible for queuing the maintenance of, not just one, but maybe a dozen sites or more. Well, we can demonstrate that as well. Let's check out that code. Check out. If I do npm run start, I've already downloaded the prerequisites and all that stuff, so saving us some time here, and it asks us which site do we want to test. So we have 3 available: the New Relic demo, the Quicksilver demo, and the Bicycle demo. Let's do the Quicksilver demo. So now we're just testing this particular example. The cool thing about this is we don't have to set up Backstop for each one of these individually. We don't have to have each one kind of having its own node app or anything like that. We can have a single file that defines the configuration for each of these scenarios, and then have let the person who's running the test select which one is most appropriate for what they're trying to do. Of course, it is having to go through all of those tests now. So jumping ahead a little bit, we do also have the option of running --all to just have it run all of the tests on all of those sites that we had defined, or we could define them individually from the command line. So if we want to set it up in one file and then individually go through and do it, we can do that. Let's take a look at this include though. So sites to update.js. Still running. Yep, so that's Quicksilver example that I just started. Let me go back and do sites to update.js. So if we look in here, this is just already set up. It's defining the variables that we need for each of those different scenarios. So we have, starting here, the New Relic example with the reference URL and URL to test, along with any other paths we want to include for additional scenarios. Quicksilver demos here, Bicycle demos here, and that's it. All of these variables that you're setting up, all these options, are just being passed over into that JSON file. Not this one in particular, but the one that we were looking at for this examples. And then that's getting all the pieces plugged in. So again, trying to think about this as a thing you can package up and pass around to use on other sites or to use for the rest of your team. All right, so Looks like I got through this in about 35 minutes. So we have some time for additional questions, some time to maybe ask about specific scenarios, or I could demonstrate other things that I've been doing with BackstopJS. Yes?
In the backstop.json file, is there a way to pass in environment variables to dynamically configure things?
Like what?
My local URL is different than my neighbor's local environment URL.
Sure, yeah. So actually, if we look at that example, let me not skip over what I had just skipped over. Let me just add them here. So within here, this is within that Node app, but the example should still be the same because we can pass in variables within the backstop.json file, so we don't have to manually configure it every single time. So this is some of it with the backstop config. It's taking all those pieces that would typically make up a backstop.json file, and it's using variables to pass in the pieces. So backstop here is a backstop test URL and backstop reference URL are what we define back here in sites to update, backstop reference and backstop test. So using this, like this pattern, you could set it up to, grab your local URL or, whatever environment variables you need to pass through. Yes?
What's the point in creating the references as a separate action?
What's the point in creating the references as a separate action? Yes. Because that sets a sort of baseline that you're testing against over and over again. Okay. So you can create the references once, and then even if things change on the live site, people are adding content or whatever, you don't have to update your reference until you're actually pushing your change up to live and you're ready for a new reference. And I have heard of teams actually committing the reference files as part of their project, so you're all testing against the same.
That's what I was curious about.
Yeah.
I was just also curious since the docs didn't mention that reference command at all anymore.
Yeah, so I suspect that the way I've been using it and the way that I've been talking to people about using it isn't the way that the community is going anymore. Yeah, I'm a little curious about that myself. Yeah, I'm not sure. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So would it be easy to set up like maybe 6 or 10 different pages that you want to do visual reference checks on every single one? Would you just put in multiple scenarios?
Yep, the question was if you have multiple pages that you want to test, every time that you run it, do you just create multiple scenarios? Yes, exactly. You would just create a scenario for every page that you want to test. Mm-hmm. And like I mentioned earlier, you can get a script, I think it's backstop crawl, that will actually go through and crawl all of your site and add them into your backstop.json file automatically. Again, though, not exactly a best practice that I've seen, because you could see even for every test, every scenario that you add, that doubles the time, or going from 1 to 2, that's twice as long. Going from 2 to 4, that's twice as long. Your test can take a really long time. So what we've been suggesting is, if you have like a site and maybe you have a content type for blogs and a content type for bios and a content type for products you're selling, maybe you have a few examples of the perfect version of each of those, and then you include those in your backstop.json, so you're effectively saying, if this one looks good, all of those blog posts probably look good.
Yeah, you probably have 9 content types and, like 12 different layouts.
Right.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
It just takes a while.
Yes, question?
I'm positive there is, but if you wanted to hide like flex slider globally, you don't have to define that in each scenario, right? There's like a global that will work on every scenario.
That's a great question. There probably is. So actually that's happening outside of the scenario.
Oh, it is?
Oh, you know what? I totally lied. No, I'm not sure.
Okay.
So the question was, do you have to define things like the hide selector every single time for each scenario, or is there a way to do it sort of like globally for an entire project? Yeah, that's a great question. I thought so. Maybe in the docs there's information about that.
I'm sure there probably. I mean, it reminds me a lot of like writing the hat tests in a way. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there is.
Yeah, if you feel comfortable writing BHAT tests, then this is probably a breeze. Yeah. Question?
Yeah, I saw on one of your previous screens that looked like there was an array of paths or something, and I made the assumption that that was basically what her question was about,
Right.
and just wanted to.
Are you talking about like this here?
Yeah, that. Okay.
Yep, so for this example, these are setting up the array within the Node app that people are selecting the site from. So when they type in which site they want to test against, it goes into this array and it grabs the one and then passes in those variables, so it's dynamically testing against that site.
I got you. Okay.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, I will be here all week, the weekend, tomorrow, I guess. Also, I'm giving a talk about regression testing tomorrow using git bisect. So if you've ever made a mistake in code, if you want to figure out when that mistake happened, or maybe how it happened, git bisect can potentially point you in the right direction, even if it was months and months ago. So it's at the same time, I think it's the same room even, tomorrow. Come and check it out here. I also have stickers and business cards, and I'll be sticking around to answer additional questions. So thank you all very much.